Hello everyone, my name is Protesilaos, also known as Prot. In this video I want to continue with the series I have been doing where I comment on the book Tao Te Ching by the ancient Chinese philosopher Lao Zi. So here is the book Tao Te Ching by Lao Zi, and this is a translation by Professor Alan Du. I got this book as a present from a friend in China. And I have thus far produced three videos on the matter where I comment on the themes covered herein. I suggest that you watch those videos because I won't be repeating myself. For example, the first video covers chapter 1 of the book, which is about the metaphysics of Lao Zi, what is Tao, and what we can say about it, and what we can say about nothingness, absence, presence, that sort of thing. What I want to do here is skip ahead a few chapters because there is a repetition of themes. We see them be rephrased or restated. Certain propositions are stated using different examples or applied in a different context. What I want to do instead is move to chapter 21 so that I do not repeat myself and instead I cover some new topic. In chapter 21, we are introduced to one of the two key words of this book. So the one word is Tao, the other word is De. And it is first introduced here in chapter 21, which I will start reading right away and then provide extensive commentary on it. Chapter 21. The appearance of the grand De follows only Tao. Tao as a thing is always vague and obscure and vague. Yet in it there is image, vague and obscure. Yet in it there is substance, dark and dim. Yet in it there is essence. The essence is so real that there is credibility in it. From the present to ancient times, its name is ever applicable, so that the origin of all things can be examined. How do I know the origin of all things? By this. And this concludes chapter 21. The translator provides a footnote regarding the meaning of the word De. And the footnote reads as follows. De originally means virtue and is a word that Lao Zi used to indicate something entirely different, i.e., the manifestation, expression, and projection, so to speak, of Tao. The manifestation of Tao. And Lao Zi is telling us, how do I know about the origin of all things? In other words, how do I know about the Tao? How can I say anything about the Tao? And the answer is provided here. I can think about the Tao, I can reason about the Tao, I can comprehend the Tao by means of its manifestations, by means of everything, by means of discerning everything out there, and then in everything, in the multitude, tracing that which they have in common, the common in the multitude. And by proceeding from there, so abstracting away from the particularities, I find that which is common in the multitude and I give it a name. And for all the abstractions, I find that which they have in common and I give them a name yet again. Until I cannot reduce any further and I say, okay, what they all have in common is that they are. So being as such is Tao. What I said in chapter 1 is, in episode 1, that was about chapter 1, is that everything we are dealing with in our world consists in a certain way, exists in a certain way. It has a mode of being. It doesn't just exist, it exists in some way. It has some behavior, as it were. So this mode of being, I call it by the Greek word tropos. So everything that is has tropos. It has to have tropos, it has to have a way of being for us to be able to discern it, for us to be able to say something about it. Because if it has no way of being, then it has nothing that is discernible. It is patternless. But if it is patternless, then we can describe it in no way. Because a description is basically an expression of a pattern through words in our case, or through language more generally. But the absence of a pattern would make it impossible for us to say anything about it. And this is where the real problem with Tao is, because we will have to say that the common in the multitude of all that have tropos must be something that does not have tropos. Because if it has tropos, then there necessarily exists something that is contrary to it, at the very least. Something that can be considered not tropos, not of that mode of being, but of another mode of being. So we will have to keep abstracting and keep abstracting until we reach the point where we are not talking about tropos. But the problem is that we cannot actually reason about the Tao. We cannot actually say anything about the Tao, because if it has no tropos, what are we describing? So we are proceeding here by means of approximation, and we are saying everything that has tropos, this I understand, and then I say, okay, what they have in common. So whatever that is. But I cannot really approach it directly. I cannot really say anything about it directly. And this is why in chapter 1, I think it's worth rereading the first sentence of it. Just a second, folks. Let me go to chapter 1. The first paragraph, it's very important in this regard. The Tao that can be articulated is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not its eternal name. And this is exactly the point. When you are naming something, you are describing something. When you are describing something, you are discerning a pattern in the cosmic continuum, a pattern in the multitudes that stands out from the multitude. So the name that can be named is not the true name of Tao, because it is with tropos. So the true name must be without tropos. But here we are involved in the impossibility of saying the name that cannot be named is the true name. But the name that cannot be named is a contradiction. We cannot actually articulate that. We cannot actually utter it. We cannot actually conceive of it, except by approximation, except by saying it is not what we know. In other words, we are understanding everything through its manifestations. But let's bring this down a notch. Let's not talk about abstractions in their abstract way. Let's think about something more specific, something more immediate to us, and try to comprehend those magnitudes with the items that we can understand. Think about dogs. So we have my dog, a specific form of life. We have the dog of the neighbor. We have this other dog, the dog that is a stray dog. We have the dog that is in some TV show, and so on and so forth. Each of those dogs is an instantiation of a breed, or more generally of some race or some characteristics that together are specific and clear, and we can say something about it. So, for example, one dog is a German Shepherd dog, another dog is an Akita, a third one is a Labrador Retriever, another is a Jack Russell, and so on and so forth. One is tall, another is short, long-haired, short-haired, etc. But when we observe dogs, we never observe German Shepherd as such. We never observe the breed as such. All we observe is the specific dog. It is my dog and the other dog and the third dog and so on. We never observe the abstract as such, but we comprehend German Shepherdness, we comprehend the breed, so what the common in the multitude is, by observing the multitude, by looking into the specific, by comprehending the particulars, we understand the general. We arrive at the general. And then we can continue abstracting and say all those types of dog, all those breeds of dog, they all have something in common, which is dog. But dog as an abstraction, for it to encompass all specimens of dog, has to be sufficiently abstract. So it cannot be, for example, a specific height, because that will rule out dogs that are not of that height. It cannot have a specific size or shape of skull, because then it will rule out various breeds of dog. It cannot have a specific length of hair, again for the same reason, and so on and so forth. So dog as such is an abstraction that we cannot actually see. We do not have dog out there. All we have is instantiations of this abstraction, particularizations, and in that particularization we have individuation. Each of those specimens is unique in some way, and yet we discern in them the pattern of the breed, the pattern of dog, and then we could say the pattern of mammal, and so on, as we keep abstracting away. The question then is, does this taxis, does this order of abstractions, so the breed and then the dog and then mammal and so on, does this taxis actually exist? Or is it merely a noetic, a mental construction? Is it a mental construct? Is it a noetic presence, or does it actually exist? It's an interesting question. It's an interesting question because then we can ask the same about the Tao. So we observe all those manifestations and we can say, okay, this exists. And we can reason about the abstractions until we reach the Tao and say, okay, what they all have in common is that. But by answering the question, does the taxis exist? Does dogness exist? If we can answer that, then we can answer whether Tao exists or whether it is a noetic construct. Let's think about it. Let's think about it and see what we can arrive at. I have been of the view that noetic constructs exist noetically. So of course we can grasp them, we can comprehend them, because we can actually reify them in our mind. So in this plane of reality that we call the mental plane, so in our mind, they definitely exist. But does this noetic presence have correspondence with an ontic presence? Does it have an existence that we can sort of touch and feel and see and so on? I think not. I think there is no correspondence in this case. We have a noetic presence, but there is no corresponding ontic presence. Nevertheless, we still have presence. And I would suggest that there is no fundamental distinction to be made between body, as it were, between what we can touch, what we can observe, what we can see, and mind at the universal scale. I would say that they are all part of a cosmic oneness. But we will get to that. We will get to that, but just keep it in mind right now. Let's talk about how species reproduce. So you will breed 2 dogs, and they will give birth to more dogs. There is randomness there. We know that there is a certain procedure that accepts certain parameters. So factors in the environment will affect the outcome, and generally no 2 specimens will be exactly the same. So there will always be differentiation. That is something that we can discern. Yet this differentiation is patternful and in a sense does not deviate from an expected, a predetermined outcome. 2 dogs reproducing will still give us dog. They will not give us tree or bird or rock or whatever. So in this mechanism of reproduction, there exists the image of the whole. There exists in it the goal, the template, as it were, of what are we working towards, what are we building. The blueprint is there. It is innate, it is immanent, it is built into the very procedure. And we can think of this with seeds, for example, the seed of a tree. So you have the seed of a tree, and given certain conditions, such as fertile soil, water, sun, and so on, given certain conditions, this seed will trigger in it a process by which it becomes tree. So it will start growing roots, it will start connecting to the soil, and then it will start absorbing, let's simplify things, it will start eating, it will start absorbing food, energy, and eventually it will keep growing and become a tree. There is no doubt that the seed will become a tree. It will not become a dog. But the tree will be unique. It will not be the exact same tree that there was before. It will be unique because, of course, the factors of the case are different. The interplay between them has changed. But perhaps also because there is innate randomness in the procedure of regeneration or reproduction itself. But this doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter if they are different or if they are the same. What matters is that the procedure will yield results that are more or less predictable, or that are within a range of possibilities. What is of interest here is that the seed encodes in it knowledge of the whole, It has a process which will expand into the whole thing. But the process is not the whole thing. The seed is not the tree, yet the seed knows, in a sense, in a manner of speaking, what it has to become. How does it know? How does it embed that blueprint? How does it incorporate that knowledge of the whole? And then we can talk about the DNA. And the DNA, I'm not an expert, of course. I just talk as a lay person. But from what I understand, the DNA is basically chemicals and proteins or whatever. So we have some chemicals, some acids, and somehow acid, in its interplay with other acids, embeds in it knowledge, embeds in it the process by which that tiny thing becomes this big thing. And it knows all the steps to get there. It knows how to go from seed form to tree form. And it knows how it will behave at each stage in the process. And we can further say that all those patterns that we can discern, patterns that are reproducible, patterns that are in a scale of, a long scale of evolution, an evolutionary scale, patterns that are reprogrammable, adaptable, thus reprogrammable. So all those patterns can reprogram themselves or be reprogrammed by virtue of their exposure to their environment on this grand scale. Those patterns have an understanding of their surroundings. Otherwise, how are they adapted? If you go out in nature, you will observe trees that grow skyward, and they grow straight up to maximize their exposure to the sun. Sometimes a tree will fall to the side. It will start inclining. And the reason is because the soil is not stable, so it starts losing balance and it shifts to the side. What will happen in that case? For example, with almond trees. I don't have a picture to show you right now, but if I find one, I will show you. For example, there are almond trees that are now growing sideways. And what they do is that they leave their branches that grow sideways, they leave them to decay. And they grow new branches that go upward, that go skyward again. And they do this because they are exhibiting a preference for sunshine over what is their demise, over what is their eventual collapse. And of course, the not optimal exposure to sunlight. So the tree knows that it has to go to the sun. The tree knows that it prefers that over the other outcome. How does it know? And it's not just the tree. The seed knows that now are the right conditions. Now there is fertile soil here. Now there is water here. Now there is the right temperature here. So I will give it a try, and I will try to become tree. How does it know? Where is this embedded? So is the noetic present? Is the image that we have of something, the concept that we have of something, just a concept that is not part of this plane of reality? I will say no. I will say that it is a concept, yes, but it is part of reality. The fact that it is reified in the mind does not mean that it is not real. Because we can act on it. All forms of life can act in accordance with whatever concept. More interestingly, we observe in trees, in dogs, in forms of life in general, we observe preferences. We observe, even at the most rudimentary level, a sense of awareness. We observe communication. Communication that is following a certain algorithm, where it says, okay, if this, then that, and I will do this other thing, else I will do something else. Even at the most basic level, we see this. And we see that language is immanent in the cosmos, as I have already talked about, logos. Logos in all of its meanings. Logos as rate, ratio, structure, reason, reason as the cause of something, but also reasonableness, and word or language. Logos is immanent in the world. It is built into the fabric of the cosmos. So if us as human beings have reason in the way that we do and preferences in the way that we do, why can't other forms of life have the same? We see that they have. So the question is, why should what we understand as consciousness, what we understand as being human, why should it stay at this level where we are at? Because what are we? What is a human being? It is a system of systems, from the subatomic or whatever level to the atoms, the molecules, and then the vital organs, and so on. And all this is a bundle that together we call the human organism, a system of systems, which itself exists within a system of systems. The ecosystem, the earth, the solar system, and so on. And all those are conditions that make possible what we have here. But in the relations between the factors, in the interplay of factors, there arise phenomena that are inherent to the system, but not to the factors in isolation. Phenomena that are emergent. So if we are observing emergence at this level that we call the human being, why can't there be emergence of a similar sort between planets, for example? What if the solar system is but the equivalent of a molecule? And this, in its interplay with other solar systems or galaxies with other galaxies, what if they themselves embed knowledge of the sort that I have been talking about here? What if all those have actually preferences and a certain behavior, a certain algorithm of behavior? You may say, but those are just rocks. The sun is just a ball of fire, basically. How can that possibly have any kind of behavior or any kind of preference? And then you ask, okay, so what is the DNA? Just acids, just proteins. And yet, somehow, there is behavior. There is a program that is reprogrammable in a certain time. That doesn't matter. That is beside the point. There is a program that has image, that has an understanding, a conception of the whole. A program that when executed, when run, will yield results that are expected results within a realm of possibilities, within a certain field of possibilities. And this raises a question about life, life as such. Now, I understand when we are talking about in conventional terms, let's go to the planet Mars and see if we can find forms of life. I understand this perfectly. But I am interested in going a step further and asking not what is life, but what is non-life? Can we think of anything that is non-life? You may be inclined to say that the stone, for example, is non-life. But you are treating the stone in isolation, and you are only treating it in the here and now. But you don't know if actually this has in its potential the possibility of interfacing, of interacting with another factor. And those will give a rise to something that we recognize as life. The constitution of the human being has in it minerals. It has iron, it has calcium, water, carbon. What are these? In a manner of speaking, we are talking about rocks and metal. Or we can generalize it and say this is just stardust. Yet this stardust gives rise to this, to a human being. The stardust gives rise to the dog, to the tree, and so on. Why would it be any different? And in more abstract terms, if there is non-life, how come there is life? Because, as I also talked about in previous episodes, from nothing there cannot be something, because there will have to be some kind of mechanism that triggers the becoming of something. But if we are talking about a mechanism or some kind of trigger, we are talking about something. So I say that nothing exists in nothing. Nothing comes from nothing. Everything that is comes from something. Everything that is goes into something. So at the cosmic scale, what we have is transfiguration. We don't have creation and destruction. We have transfiguration. We don't have from nothing to nothing with an intermediate of something. And even in theology, such as in the West, where Christianity is the predominant religion, you will hear the view that God created the world from nothing. Strictly speaking, this is wrong, because God, the world was not created from nothing. It was created from God. It was not created in nothing, because it was created in whatever God determined to be the realm of reality. Something. Non-life, then. Is there non-life? I think not. I think that the universe, the cosmos as such, is alive. The universe is the living universe. And what we understand as life, when we are talking about life, is a specific instantiation of life, one that is recognizable to us, perhaps. But it is not exhausting the concept of life. And it is not showing us all the possibilities of life. The manifestations there. The manifestations of any concept in a living universe are manifestations of concepts that are in the universe. So the universe as such, this living universe, the cosmos as a whole, has mind as well. And every concept is in this mind. And everything that happens in accordance with this blueprint. So we have immanence throughout. And again, this is the same of saying logos. Logos is inherent. Logos, as I said earlier, all the meanings of logos. Rate, ratio, structure, that is, reason, cause, and reasonableness, language, everything. So how do we know about the Tao? This is what Lao Zi is saying. I know about the Tao because I observe the manifestations of Tao. And abstracting away from the particularities, I arrive at the general. I arrive at what Plato called the form, the ideal. And the forms exist. They exist noetically in our mind. But our mind is not a unique phenomenon. It's not exhausting mind. So if they exist in our mind, they exist in mind as such. This is a tricky concept, of course. These are tricky concepts, but there is something practical for us. And that is that we have to understand that we are not really special. As humans, are not really special. We are not special in the universe, but we are definitely not special even on planet Earth. There are other forms of life here in the conventional sense that we see exhibit many of the things that we exhibit. Since I mentioned dogs, dogs have feelings, dogs have expectations, they have desires, they have preferences, they have fears. They can be arrogant, they can be reckless, and so on, what we have. And of course, they are social animals, they are territorial animals, and so on, which is something that we know all too well. And we can say similar things about trees, and we can say similar things about other forms of life on this planet. So we must ask ourselves, whenever we think that we are special, either in terms of us being human, so as humankind being special, but also as individuals, like am I special relative to my neighbors or whatever? And we must ask, are we really? Are we really special? And I think the answer is no. And if the answer is no, then for us, the takeaway, the lesson, is that we do not have to prove anything to anyone. If we are operating with the pressure of proving ourselves, we are not free. We will go to great ends to show that we are special. We will go to great ends to prove something that fundamentally is wrong. And yet we will still do it. So we are not free. We are under the influence of a falsehood. And this falsehood makes us do terrible things. Terrible things to ourselves. Terrible things to the planet at large. So there are concepts here that are very abstract. Concepts here that are about metaphysics. Nevertheless, from these concepts we can understand things and distill that kind of wisdom and then apply it to the specifics, to what we are experiencing in our quotidian affairs, in our daily life. That's all for today, folks. Thank you very much for your attention. Take care, and I will talk to you next time. Goodbye.